The United States military seized a Venezuelan vessel in international waters. No declaration of war, no congressional approval, no legal justification, just raw power and absolute silence. Welcome. I'm Jeffrey Sachs. And what I'm about to tell you should terrify every American who still believes in the rule of law. Because what happened off the coast of Venezuela wasn't just a military operation, it was piracy. And the fact that nobody is talking about it reveals something far more dangerous than the act itself. Let me be clear about what occurred. In late 2024, U.S. naval forces intercepted and boarded a Venezuelan flagged vessel in international waters. They seized the ship. They detained the crew. They justified this action by claiming the vessel was involved in illicit activities. But here's the problem. The seizure didn't happen in U.S. territorial waters. It didn't happen with Venezuelan consent. It didn't happen under any recognized international legal framework. It happened because the United States decided it could. And when a great power acts without legal authority, when it seizes assets on the high seas without due process, there's a word for that: piracy. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating. You might think this is hyperbole designed for effect. But consider what piracy actually means under international law. It's the unauthorized seizure of a vessel in international waters. That's the textbook definition. And that's exactly what the United States did. The response from Washington: silence. The response from Congress: nothing. The response from the media: a few buried paragraphs, quickly forgotten. And this isn't an isolated incident. This is part of a pattern, a deliberate strategy, what President Trump calls his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Let me explain what that means, because most Americans have been taught that the Monroe Doctrine simply says the Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States, that we're in charge here, that Latin America is our backyard. But that's not what President Monroe said in 1823, not even close. The Monroe Doctrine had three parts. First, Europe should not reclaim the newly independent countries of the Americas. Second, Europe should not introduce military forces into our hemisphere. And third, the part everyone forgets: the United States would not interfere in Europe's wars and security affairs. It was reciprocal. You stay out, we stay out. That lasted 70 years. Then came Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt loved empires. He loved the idea of American power projecting itself wherever it pleased. And in 1904, he declared his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. He said the United States would be the policeman of the Western Hemisphere. We would intervene in the internal affairs of Latin American countries whenever we deemed it necessary. The irony: he did this because of Venezuela. In 1902, Venezuela defaulted on debt. Britain and France shelled Caracas harbor. Roosevelt said, "We'll handle this. We're the police now." And for decades we did. Marines in Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, overthrowing governments, installing puppets. Franklin Roosevelt reversed this in 1933. His good neighbor policy declared we wouldn't interfere in hemispheric affairs. This became international law in 1948 when the Organization of American States adopted Article 19. No country should interfere in others' internal affairs. We signed that. We wrote it. Now Donald Trump has declared the Trump corollary. Roosevelt's version 10 times over. He's not just saying we're the policeman, he's dictating economic relationships. Latin American countries cannot trade with China, cannot accept Chinese investment, must do business with us or face consequences. Venezuela is the test case. Friendly with China, trades with Russia, refuses Washington's demands, so Trump masses troops, seizes assets, intercepts ships, kills people in boats. Congress says nothing. Media barely notices. Americans remain unaware. The counter-argument: Venezuela is a dictatorship. Maduro is terrible. Fine. Assume that's true. Does that give the United States the legal authority to seize Venezuelan vessels in international waters? Does that give us the right to overthrow their government? Does that justify military intervention? Because if it does, then we've abandoned the entire framework of international law. We've returned to a world where might makes right, where the strong do as they please and the weak suffer what they must. And that's not just morally wrong, it's strategically suicidal. Because here's what Trump and his advisors don't understand. The world has changed. America is not the colossus we imagine ourselves to be. We represent 4.1% of the global population. Our economy is roughly 14% of global GDP, not 50%, not even 25%, 14%. We're powerful, but not omnipotent. When we seize ships without legal authority, when we threaten regime change at will, we don't project strength, we project desperation. China, Russia, India are watching. They're learning a very clear lesson. American commitments mean nothing. American law is just rhetoric. American power is the only principle that matters. And once that lesson is learned, once the world understands that the United States will not be bound by the rules it helped create, then those rules cease to exist. And we enter a far more dangerous world, a world where every nation pursues its interests through raw power, a world where military force becomes the primary tool of diplomacy. Is that the world we want? Let me give you a concrete example of how dangerous this is. Right now, China is the largest trading partner for more than 120 countries. More than 120. They're not going to stop trading with China because Washington demands it. So what happens when Trump tells them they must choose? When he says you're either with us or against us? When he threatens sanctions, tariffs, military action? They choose China, not because they love China, not because they think China is virtuous, but because China offers them something America does not. Predictability, respect for their sovereignty, the ability to make their own decisions without being bullied. And that's the great irony. Trump thinks he's projecting strength. He thinks seizing Venezuelan ships makes America look powerful, but it does the opposite. It makes us look weak, desperate, willing to violate our own principles because we can no longer compete on the merits. China doesn't need to seize ships. They build ports. They offer loans. They create economic partnerships. And when countries choose to work with China, it's not because China threatened them. It's because China offered them a better deal. We used to lead through example. We created the UN, wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, established the World Trade Organization. Not because we were weak, because we understood even the most powerful nation needs rules. Law creates predictability, allows coordination, prevents miscalculations that lead to catastrophic wars. Trump calls this quaint, says the UN is a petty encumbrance, thinks treaties constrain American power. He's wrong, and history will judge him harshly. While Trump obsesses over Venezuela, China builds the Belt and Road Initiative. They're investing in infrastructure across Asia, Africa, Latin America, creating partnerships that will define the next century. We're seizing ships, threatening invasions, starting conflicts that drain resources and alienate allies. This isn't strategy, it's imperial overreach, and it ends as it always ends, in decline, in weakness, in loss of everything we claim to defend. Now, some will ask, where is Congress in all of this? Why aren't they stopping him? The answer is simple. Congress is dead. Not literally, of course, but functionally. 3 former senators recently said exactly that. The Senate is dead. There is no Congress. And they're right. President Trump launches military operations without congressional approval. He imposes tariffs without legislative authorization. He declares national emergencies to bypass constitutional limits on his power. And Congress does nothing. They don't object. They don't investigate. They don't use their constitutional authority to check executive overreach. The House of Representatives is supposed to control the power of the purse. Taxes and tariffs must originate there. That's in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. But Trump ignores that. He declares an emergency. He decides he doesn't like what India is doing, or Brazil, or Venezuela, and he imposes tariffs himself, unilaterally, without congressional input. Where is the outrage? Where are the hearings? Where is the defense of constitutional government? Nowhere. Because Congress has surrendered its authority, they've become spectators to executive power. And when the legislative branch abdicates its responsibility, what you have is not a republic, it's an autocracy. I don't say this lightly. I'm not being partisan. I thought the Biden administration was terrible. Their handling of Ukraine was disastrous. Their blank check to Netanyahu enabled horrific crimes in Gaza. I'm not defending Democrats. I'm defending the Constitution. I'm defending the rule of law. And what Trump is doing in Venezuela, what he's doing around the world, violates both. So what's the solution? How do we fix this? First, Congress needs to wake up. They need to reassert their constitutional authority. They need to pass laws that constrain executive military action. They need to hold hearings on Venezuela. They need to investigate the vessel seizure. They need to demand legal justification for military operations. Second, the American public needs to pay attention. Most people have no idea their government is seizing ships in international waters. Most people don't know about the threats against Venezuela. Most people have been told that Trump is making America great again. But greatness doesn't come from piracy. It doesn't come from violating international law. It comes from leadership, from principle, from building a world where cooperation is possible and where small countries don't have to fear the whims of great powers. Third, we need to rebuild our commitment to international institutions. The UN isn't perfect. The World Trade Organization has flaws, but they're better than the alternative. They're better than a world where every dispute is resolved through military force. China cannot attack us. Russia cannot invade us. We're protected by oceans and the world's most powerful military. We're safe. We're only endangered through our own actions. Starting unnecessary wars, alienating allies, convincing the world America is a rogue state respecting only its own power. Venezuela is a symptom of deeper disease, the belief that America is so powerful we can do whatever we want, seize ships, overthrow governments, dictate relationships, face no consequences. But we will face consequences. Countries are diversifying from the dollar, building alternative trade networks, reducing dependence on American institutions. One day we'll wake up realizing the world moved on. China leads where we once led. Our bases are liabilities, not assets. Our arrogance isolated us from partners we need. That day is coming unless we change course, unless we return to principles that made America respected, not just feared. Venezuela is a test. Whether America believes in law, whether Congress functions, whether Americans care what's done in their name. We're failing badly. If we continue, the consequences will be catastrophic, not for Venezuela, for us. Thank you for watching.